We are going to speak today about Purim. I think that most of us have a working understanding of the basic story of Purim. Just go through it very quickly, especially the part that is relevant to today's discussion. The Purim story happens in, let's say, about 500 years before the Common Era. And the Babylonian Empire, which is a dominant civilization for centuries and centuries in Mesopotamia, is conquered by the Persian Empire. In Jewish thinking, just as an aside, that place always is called Babylonia. Whatever reason, no matter who's ruling it at the time, they don't it's called Bavel, and it's a very important geographic area in Jewish history. The Talmud comes from there and so on. So a Persian emperor takes over, and he rises to power. He is married to a granddaughter of Cyrus the Great, and her father is named Belshazzar. I don't know how you do that in English, Belshazzar or something like that. Morning, and he is the king of the Persian Empire. His name is Achashverosh. It's probably a Xerxes of one stripe or another. The scene opens up with him throwing a huge party for many days. And that's a common thing. Think about the kings of old, a lot of opulence, a lot of extravagance. There's a huge party. And one of the things that Torah says, the Megillah, the book of Esther says clearly, is that there was no limits and on alcohol, free open bar. But it gets a little bit more into it, talking about the opulence. And then when everybody's drunk, Achashverosh, the king, calls for his wife Vashti, who herself is royalty. She's more, by blood, she's more royalty than he is, and which is also a part of this subtext of the story. And he calls her to come and present for his guests, and she says, "No, whatever it was." And he turns. He's embarrassed. He's taken aback. Turns to his advisors. What do we do? Say, off of their head, which is what they used to do though. That opens a job vacancy for Queen, and he does a pageant, and this Jewish girl, she's Jewish unbeknownst to him, Esther, is chosen to be the queen, and then now she is installed as a sleeper Jewess in the palace. And at that point, a series of events unfold. There's a wicked man named Haman who wants to destroy the Jews. Achashverosh, who is ultimately seen as either a dope or very bright, but the guy offers him money. He says, "Yeah, okay, kill them all," and that's the Purim danger. And Mordechai begins to pray. He gathers people to pray. He goes and Esther, who apparently doesn't know yet about the decree, clearly doesn't know yet about the decree. She sends someone to Mordechai, who is her uncle, like, what's going on? And he tells her, and he says, and you got to go to the king, to ask for mercy. And she says, well, the king asks for mercy. He hasn't called me in 30 days. This isn't the United States where there's basic decency and respect. If a person who comes to the king without being called gets killed. And Mordechai says, listen, we don't have a choice. And maybe this is the reason that God brought you to power. And she says, I'm going to do what I have to do, have everyone pray for me, and if I die, I die. And she has that self-sacrifice. She goes to the queen, she goes to the king, and she reveals Haman's plan, and the king reverses the decree and kills Haman. Okay. So one of the things which is not mentioned today up front, but just for us to recognize that even though this is, and I mentioned it yesterday in Shul, even though this is a book of scripture, this is a book of scripture that doesn't mention God. And the narrative works very well without mentioning God, because the idea of any time that there's a supernatural miracle, you got to say who did the miracle. Here, there's no supernatural miracle. It appears like things worked well. We had people in the right places. We had lucky breaks, and everything worked out. It's not a story that shouts divine intervention. And one, in fact, needs a certain set of eyes, a certain set of lenses to see divine intervention, because it reads like a good screenplay without God. And one of the beauties, or perhaps the primary beauty of what makes Purim over the ages, is that the Jewish people declared it a holiday, and a holiday of divine intervention. They saw God's hand in their success. And the lesson was, when you look at the Torah, you say God split a sea and God did this and God did that. We believe it, but when I have a problem Monday morning that I'm facing with at work or whatever it is, I'm not expecting any split sea. But when I look at a story of scripture, and you look at what seem to be normal human events, but they are divinely guided to bring to a good outcome, that I can hope for on Monday. I'm not looking for the heavens to open up and just to shower me with some miracle. I'm looking for God's help in going step one to step two, step three, and I believe we get God's help, and I get God's help, and those are what we call miracles clothed in nature. So now back to the story for because we're going to come back to this idea also of the Jewish attitude of taking the extra step of recognizing God when they didn't have to recognize God. They could have just said, "This was a great shot, good story." Remember when Entebbe happened? People say that my house was saying, "Thank God," and people saying, "No, thank the Mossad." They thank both. But it was human ingenuity and creativity, true. But sometimes, but we look at it and say, who blessed the human ingenuity and creativity? Because sometimes it doesn't work.
Just watch it on the corner of the TV.
Thank you. The guy works for the liability. Yeah, okay. So now we're going to start with text 1, and we're going to work into an interesting lesson from the text of the scroll of Esther. Text 1. This is the very beginning of the book of Esther. It says that it came to pass in the days of Achashverosh. Again, Achashverosh in our thing, that would probably be called. It's either, sometimes it says Ahasuerus or whatever it is, or Xerxes. He was a Persian emperor. This was the Achashverosh who reigned from India to Ethiopia over 7 and 2100, 7 and 20 and 100 provinces, 127 provinces. That in those days, when King Achashverosh established himself upon his imperial throne in Shushan, the capital, so this was actually in Iran, and there's still a Shushan there. In the 3rd year of his reign, he made a feast for all his ministers and servants, the forces of Persia and Media, the nobles, and the provincial ministers before him. When he displayed the wealth of his glorious kingdom and the honor of his splendid majesty many days, 180 days. That's a heck of a party. And when these days were complete, the king made a feast for all the people present in Shushan, the capital, for great and small alike, 7 days on the grounds of the royal palace's garden. So there was this huge 180-day thing, and then just for Shushan, let it go, big party on the grounds of the palace. There were drapes of white, fine cotton, blue, embroidered with cords of fine linen and royal purple, and silver rods and marble pillars, couches of gold and silver upon a pavement of alabaster, marble, pearl, and black onyx. And he served drink in vessels of gold, vessels of all different types, and the royal wine was in abundance to fit the king's power. The drinking followed the rule, no coercion. Now, no coercion, from the context, sounds like we're not going to force you to stop. Maybe we wouldn't even force you to drink. They had Snapple also, but it was free. The drink was free. It was untrammeled, and that was a big deal in those days.
Open bar.
Open bar. Said that before. For the drink had established that all of his free. Yeah, if the drink had established all that his house's offer should do as each man desired. Okay. So this seems relatively simple to understand. There's this huge party. So now, text 2, we get to the first element that leads us through the Purim miracle. Also, Vashti the queen made a feast for the women in the royal palace that belonged to Achashverosh, but they had separate parties. On the 7th day was a mechitza. When the king's heart was merry with wine, he commanded Muhammad, Bizasa, Charbina, Bixa, Vaxa, Sesa, Chakas, the 7 eunuchs who served King Achashverosh, to bring Vashti the queen before the king with the royal crown to show the people and the officers her beauty, for she was beautiful. He wanted to show off her beauty. He wanted to objectify her, and Queen Vashti was not up for that. She refused to come at the king's command, conveyed by the eunuchs. The king was very angry, and his wrath burned in him because he had been humiliated. King said to the wise men who knew the times, for so was the king's way, to consult with those who knew law and judgment. And those close to him were, at that time, Kashna, Shesad, Moses, Hashis, Meres, Marsalam, Muchan, the 7 princes of Persia and Media, who saw the king's face and sat first in the kingdom. These are all verses from the book of Esther. According to law, what shall we do to Queen Vashti, since she has not done in the bidding of King Achashverosh, conveyed by the eunuchs? This is Achashverosh was asking his wise people. And Memuchan answered before the kings and princes, not against the king alone as Vashti the queen sinned, but also against all the princes and all the people and all the provinces of the king Achashverosh. For the queen's deed will be known to all women, and will cause them to view their husbands with contempt, saying, King Achashverosh commanded to bring Vashti before him, and she did not come, so why do I have to bring you your dinner? So this is seemingly benign. Thinking in the terms of the ancient days, where monarchs ruled, and literally ruled, and they could do whatever they want. The protocol at the times was disobey the king, you're dead. So Achashverosh here, he has his wife disobeying him publicly, and yet he doesn't say you're dead. Now that could be because he knew, she's the king's daughter, and the previous king's daughter, and he's just a shmendrik. But now he's sitting on the throne. He doesn't do that. He asks. And what do the advisors say? The advisors don't say, King, protocol is protocol. She disrespected you. And what they say is, you got to deal with it. But it's really because it's going to cause havoc out there. Well, that itself is disrespectful. So he says, you guys are worried about your wife not bringing dinner. You're not worried about what my wife just did to me. If they're going to advise him to offer their head, say offer their head. King, you're the king. Look what you just did. They don't mention that. Say, king, you just set up such a bad model for the empire. You asked your wife to do something. She said no. You, one thing. What do you want from us? Now you're messing it up for all of us. Very odd response, and actually an odd question of Achashverosh to even ask them, especially taking into account that if you look at, I'm sorry, I didn't go down for the second one. Is that for that? Just if you want to read through this pretty quickly, and then go to 3 very quickly. Text 3, it says, we find later in the book of Esther, when Mordechai, as I mentioned before, Mordechai tells Esther, you've got to go to the king and save the Jews. And she says, I can't just go. All the king's servants and the people of the king's provinces know that every man or woman who comes to the king to the inner court who is not called, not that they disobey. That's for sure. If you come without being called, there's but one law for them, to be killed. That's protocol. That's law. She says, as far as I know, he loves me. But if I go into his room without being called, I'm dead. Only those to whom the king extends his golden scepter will live. And I have not been called to come to the king for 30 days. So text 3 is there to help us establish that there's a protocol. You don't mess with the king. It's ancient times. It's crazy monarchical times. And here, she didn't, Vashi didn't come without permission. She refused in public. She humiliated him, or at least in front of his retinue at court, and he didn't do anything. He's asking for advice, and the advice is, well, it's not about you, it's about us. Yeah.
Okay, it's my understanding that when she was called to display herself, she was basically to display herself naked.
That is definitely one opinion,
And, you know.
which was also not so unusual in those days.
Mhm.
Even before the 60s, it happened. And before the sexual liberation.
Oh, Woodstock.
Woodstock,
Alright.
yeah,
Well, it wasn't sure which section.
yes. And in Kentucky, they didn't have that. So
Well, back home.
this is, yes, there are different midrashim on it, Eric, but the point is that she didn't come. She didn't say, I'm embarrassed or whatever. She just said, no, pound salt. Okay. So now we go to text 4a. This is from a great Sephardic scriptural
Saros was dead.
commentary.
Right?
Yes, and so was Belshazzar. He had become. But this is from Rabbi Ben Attar's, this 1700s, well, primarily the 1700s, who and he writes because he has a commentary on the scripture and also on Queen Esther. Those who close to him were. One may ask, what does Memuchan mean? He knows what he asked his people close to him. What does Memuchan mean when he says, not the king alone, not against the king alone is Vashti the queen sinned? It implies that her sinning against the king alone is insufficient to justify her execution. I mean, it's such a, in those days, you have to be really careful what you said to the king, that you recognize he is supreme. So here, someone has just insulted him. He said, what do I do? Well, king, he didn't just insult you. He messed it up for all of us. That itself, they should get killed for even saying that. Who cares about you? It's me. King is everything is the king. Yet, in truth, it is only because of her actions toward the king that she might be executed. Memuchan's words are almost incomprehensible. It doesn't make sense on a normal level. What is going on here? What do we mean? Text 4b, another great commentary on the Megillah. It's hard to understand why this guy Memuchan said, who some people say Memuchan was Daniel, not against the king alone has Vashti the queen sinned, but also against all the princes. This itself constituted rebellion against the king, that he considered the minister's needs more important than the monarch. So this is just a basic question in the text that any kid could ask. Like if they've been watching enough of medieval times, what's going on here? Why doesn't the king isn't decisive to address this public humiliation? And when he asks his advisors, why don't they just say, king, you're our king. The rules are clear. Someone disrespects, or shut up. But don't say they're advising him to kill her, but not because they were disrespectful to him, but because he's messing it up for everyone else. Now, it's a question that many commentaries discuss and explain in different ways. The Rebbe's problem here was, why doesn't Rashi say anything? Always back to Rashi. Why isn't Rashi saying anything? His idea is his job, as he writes himself, is to make it the text flow for a 5-year-old, and to address questions that might come up to a 5-year-old. This is not some brilliant question that you need a lot of Talmudic knowledge to know. It's just it doesn't really work.
Really bothering me, I'm sorry.
This I consume myself. I know people who did that. Text 5.
Huh? I've done enough of these places.
So now let's take a look at text 5. Yes, which is on 126. The Rebbe is going to position this and explain that Rashi already set the stage in prior verses, so that this is not a question. He already explained prior verses that needed explanation, so that by the time the child gets to this spot, they understand. What is that? Let's go back to text 1 for a second. And we go to verse 8. We said the drinking followed the rule, no coercion. For the king had established that all his house's officers should do as each man desired. What does that mean? A kid would ask that. He said, there are drapes, fine linen, couches of gold, and drink. That's what we're being told. I'm sure there was food, there was no doubt. But meanwhile, they're talking drink. He served drink in vessels of gold and royal wine. We're into the alcohol here. That's all that we're being told. And the drinking followed the rule, no coercion, much as they want. For the king had established that all his house's officers should do as each man desired. What do you mean, all his house's officers? You mean the bartenders? Who are the house's officers? Where do they come in here? We're talking about everybody can drink. Open bars. Plenty of storehouses of drink. What does that have to do with all his house's officers? So Rashi on that verse had commented, text 5, all his house's officers says over all the officials of the feast, the chief of the bakers, the chief of the butchers, and chief of the cupbearers. Rashi totally expands this. Not in a way that you see from the verse. Says this was not just about drink, even though that's what the scripture is telling us, taking it literally. Rashi is saying, no, this wasn't just about drink. This was food, baking. This was meat and drink. Drink doesn't even come first. He's saying that this was a general approach. What was that? What the Rebbe is saying here is, he's saying this was a Achashverosh had brought a bunch of guests. Persian life and monarchical life all over the world for millennia was a lot of protocol, rules. And this is how we do it, and that's how we don't do it. And they do it the way we don't do it, we go. Right? We live surrendered to the rules of the monarchy.
Even though the monarch was drunk out of his mind.
He'd have to go to the center. What did he do? Doesn't say he was drunk out of his mind, but let's say. It says when his heart was glad with wine. But either way, it certainly was inebriated. What the Rebbe says is what Rashi is teaching us is that Achashverosh gave a special gift of this 7-day feast. The members of Shushan come to my palace. There are no rules.
This is a setup.
There's no rules. There's no that. Eat, do whatever you want here. When it comes to eating, probably other things too, and the drinking, there's no rules here. In other words, he set aside the coercion, he set aside the rules, he set aside the limitations. Therefore, if you look at Rashi says there also, it says, because one of the things it says that about the rules, because in 1:8, in verse 8, once I go back to it, the drinking followed the rule, no coercion. So the rule was, there's no rules. What is that? What was that doing? No coercion. What was the coercion? We said it means you can drink whatever you want. Rashi says it was something different. Some feasts And if you look in the history, this was something that went on not just in Persian empires. Some feasts that would force guests to drink from a large vessel, and in honor of the king. And some are only able to drink it all with difficulty. But here there was no coercion. There was many times the king would say, drink, and they would give a large cup. Let's look at text 7. Rabbi Levi says in the Medrash, the Persians had a custom of serving wine in an enormous cup holding 5 measures. It was called a pitka. Even at the risk of death or madness or alcohol poisoning, you could not return it. You had to drink it. You had to drink it in honor of the king. It's too much, too bad. Your life doesn't mean that much to us. And the cup bearers would grow rich from this, as guests would bribe them to avoid such distress. Let's say, here's a ruby, get rid of this from me. Achashverosh, however, let no such a cup appear at his feast. He said, no coercion. So, what does this mean? This means that Achashverosh, Vashti, cornered Achashverosh in his own game. He says, rules are off for this week. I'm a rule guy. I'm Emperor of Persia. But this week, no. We're not, you don't have to finish your cup. You don't have to even drink from that cup. You can drink as much as you want, as little as you want. There's no rules. And he says, because he's inebriated, he says, I want my wife to come and show her beauty. And she says, no rules? Okay, I don't have to listen to you. I'm not coming. You said no rules. So what does Achashverosh do? Achashverosh is stumped. What do I do with this? I made a rule. There's no rules, and you can break the rules, and she's breaking the rule. But this is horrible. So he turns to his advisors, and the advisors say to him, "You said no rules, cool, but here there has to be a limit to no rules because you're going to create something which is going to be a breakdown of the fabric of the kingdom. You can't have wives staying their husbands pound salt. I'm not listening to you." So they're not saying it's about us, not you. They're saying, King, you can't. You think no rules was very nice, but it's got to have limitations. Even unlimited, a lack of limitations has to have a limitation. You can't go destroy the kingdom and destroy people's homes. So that's what he needed, and he killed him. Okay, that explains that. The Rebbe is going to take this to a more spiritual perspective, because bearing in mind as we go forward that the king Achashverosh, who was not a good guy, King Achashverosh created this feast as a time of free will, volition, no coercion. Do what you want. He saw the value in a world of monarchy where you weren't allowed to do what you want. You had to do what he wanted. He says, here's safe space. You can do what you want. And things unfolded. The kernel of thought we want to carry forward is not anymore about Vashti and drinking and all of that. It's about this idea that the Megillah, the book of Esther, tells us the story of a king, a human king, giving us this oasis, even if it was only 7 days, of free choice, no coercion. Now, let's go to text 8. Here in text 8, this is from a great rabbi who's the author of the Code of Jewish Law, Ashkenazim, but he wrote a commentary also on the book of Esther. He says, in my opinion, it's impossible for Megillat Esther, the book of Esther, to not contain both an inner and outer meaning. All of Torah has multiple meanings. Kabbalah, spiritual meanings. He says one might think that Megillas Esther, since it's the last of the Canaanite scriptures, maybe it's just a great story. It's an important story, but it is literal meaning. Period. No. Megillas Esther also has to have the surface meaning and the ability to read it in a deeper, more mystical, spiritual, divine key. As our sages say in the Talmud, Esther was told with the divine spirit. Esther was a prophetess. Esther was gifted with divine guidance. And that's what, including in having this written. She debated with the rabbis at the time about whether to make a book of Esther, and she won. Just like all other holy, because they didn't want to go so far with that. They figured the Canaan is finished, but she got her way, not because she was queen, but because she had the spiritual voltage. Just like all other holy scriptures. For one example, you can prove the nature of the entire category. From one example, you can prove the nature of the entire category. If the other holy scriptures contain both hidden and revealed meanings, surely this is true of Megillah as well. So he sets in his introduction, Rabbi Moshe Issel is here. He says that this is we have to be able, be prepared, have eyes to look at read the Megillah in a more spiritual key. And he says it as a general rule, but of course, Rabbi Moshe Issel is carrying on a tradition. In the rabbis of the Talmud, in the Medrash, text 9a, says Rabbi Yudan and Rabbi Levi said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. Every time the Megillah says King Achashverosh, because it comes up a lot in the Megillah, it refers to King Achashverosh. But every time it simply says the king, it can be read as referring to God or Achashverosh. There are some Megillahs, I don't have one of them, there are some Megillahs that start off, there are columns. Every column starts with the word Hamelach, the king. And the reason they do that is because this Medrash says that when it says just the king, you can read it as what it means in the narrative of what happened there in Persia, or there's something going on there that could talk to you about what God does for us. That's the Medrash. So you can definitely, we have from Talmudic times the idea of reading the Medrash in a more divine key. Yeah. In every instance of just the king, this is the Zohar tells us this, primary book of Kabbalah, it refers to the Holy One Blessed be. So this dates back millennia that the king can mean, it means obviously Achashverosh in the story, but it also means God.
Could this be, could the interpretation from Rabbi Levi be because there is no direct mention of God in the book of Esther?
It could be, but if it isn't, it isn't. But it's clearly every time it says the king, it's part of a sentence that's talking about Achashverosh. No one's disputing that. No one's disputing that. When it says the king, it means Achashverosh. What he's saying is that there's also a deeper. So the king there is not talking about God on the surface. It's talking about God in reading in a deeper level, like the Zohar is telling us. Now, one of the reasons for that is that we find in writings, and they bring one example of it here from just post-Talmudic times. One of our first authorities, or to some people's opinion, the first printed book, not printed, it wasn't printed, but first published book of Torah law after the Talmud. He makes a statement that greater is the day of Purim than the day the Torah was given. That's a big deal. The day the Torah was given, that's literally history altering, face to face with God. I mean, every year we celebrate it with a biblical holiday on Shavuos. Purim is a rabbinically instituted holiday, and it says Purim is even greater than the day the Torah was given. Now, as we will unpack somewhat, but just to tell you, the Torah says, the Talmud tells us that towards the end of the Megillah, when it talks about how the Jews were were celebrating, and they were given instructions by Esther and Mordechai for how to celebrate Purim for the ages, it says that they fulfilled and they accepted. And the Talmud says they fulfilled what they had already accepted. And the Talmud says there that when the Jews were at Sinai and they had, I can't imagine it, God talking to them. And the Torah says there's thunder and lightning and the sound of a shofar, and there's this majesty on the mountain, and and everybody's just, they're human beings, and they're saying we can't handle it. The Torah says this is too much for us. They accepted Torah. They said, we will do, we accept. The Talmud says that wasn't a real acceptance. What are you going to do? Say no? The heavens have opened. God is saying, I created the world. I created you. I just took you out of Egypt. Here's the deal. Here's the user's manual for life. He's taking it and say, thank you. What are you going to say no? We just saw what he did to the Egyptians. And second of all, this is God talking to you. There was no minuscule thought that this wasn't real. So that's not an acceptance. That's what we call coercion. And the words of the Talmud, it's like God held Mount Sinai over their heads and said, are you accepting this? Because if not, I'm dropping it. They had no choice. So in the words of the Talmud, the Jews always had an out of, if God would turn to them and say, you're not keeping the Torah, say, well, we never really accepted it. You forced it on. We took this under duress. Purim was a time the Jews were living well. The Jews were living well in the Persian kingdom. Babylonia was America of its time. Jews were living well. They were in government. They did well financially. They had a terrible threat, but they were in pretty good shape. There was no opening of the heavens. There was no divine miracle. There was a story. You had anti-Semites, and we pulled strings. We have one of our own in the palace. Mordechai is also part of government. Some lucky breaks, and we got it. We got through. It happens. So instead of just having this recorded as saying this is one of the times, thank God, we were successful, we say, we see that this was a miracle. We understand, God, that we were doing the work, but you were doing this. And even at the time when they were working, when they were faced with this oppression, what did they do? They prayed. When Esther had to go into King Achashverosh, who was a hedonistic, not someone you and I would respect in today's mindset. She said, it says there, she says, I'm going to fast for 3 days before I go in. Guys like this, they go with beauty, and they want to fast. Once you've gotten past your meeting with him, you want to be in the best shape possible when you go in to see him. Because with him, it's all about sensual pleasure. But she understood that whatever she had was really given by God. She said, I'm going to fast for 3 days before I go in. Because the Jews at the time, not just about Mordechai and Esther, they committed themselves to God and God's Torah, and the idea that God is the one who can help them. So here in text 11, we have from the founder of Chabad, writes one of the things about the Megillah. He quotes a verse from the Song of Songs. It says that it says his right hand embraced me. Song of Songs is like it's in its literal sense, it's like a love poem. And his right hand embraced me. We're talking about God and the Jews having this love affair. This refers to the revelation of divine love from above into the Jewish people. As it is written, I love you, says God. God's love embraced the Jewish people, completely enveloping them, even the lowest aspects, until he left them no space to turn. By Sinai, we were smothered by God. They could only stand face to face with him. Meaning, this divine love called forth a reciprocal love in the Jewish souls, and it came so high as to immediately say, we will do it. It was beautiful, but God was embracing us. We were smothered by love, and we felt it back, and we said, they didn't feel coerced, but they were in a situation where really they didn't have space to balance and consider what they want to do. So it was a very intimate, loving connection at Mount Sinai, but it was something that was triggered from above. And as the Book of Esther says, and I mentioned this before, it says thereafter, this is towards the end of the Megillah, they call these days Purim, after the Pur. The Pur is the lottery that Haman used to decide a day when the Jews would be oppressed. Therefore, on the account of all this letters, words, and what they had seen, this is all quoting from the Book of Esther and what had happened to them. The Jews established and accepted upon themselves and upon their offspring and all upon who will join them, they would not cease to observe these 2 days as written. There's Purim, then what's called Shushan Purim, which is it's celebrated in walled cities, the ancient walled cities like Jerusalem has it's on Shushan Purim, and in their appointed time every year. What does that mean? They establish and accept upon themselves. And I mentioned this just before. Rava said, and this is from the Talmud, the Jewish people accepted the Torah again in the time of Achashverosh. As it says, the Jews established and accepted upon themselves. They reaffirmed what they had already accepted at Mount Sinai. And this was one that would stick, that they did this voluntarily. And that's the theme of today's talk. It's that God values what we do voluntarily. And just like the Megillah, the Book of Esther, talks about how Achashverosh, who not someone we look up to, gave them this space for 7 days of uncoerced, free choice at a party. Want to read that as sometimes not only as King Achashverosh doing that historically, but the King, God, doing that to us, giving us this space in the Purim story and in our lives today. In March of 2025, we have the free choice to be able to bring God into our lives.
What was the lottery for?
The lottery was to choose a day of when people would have legal permission to go and kill Jews. Haman threw a lottery.
Mhm.
That's what Purim comes from.
So people would draw from this?
No, he threw a lottery.
Yeah.
He got permission from the king to set a day,
Yeah.
and he wanted to set a day, so he set a day through throwing a lottery for himself.
Oh, okay.
It wasn't lottery. It was
Put your hand in the bucket, whatever day comes
correct.
out.
Yeah.
Okay.
Look, first a month and then a day. Look, I've said before you this day. This is from the Torah: life and good and death and evil. God tells us as a general thing, well before Purim and well after Purim. That's the bottom line of Torah. We have a choice to take which road, which lane we want to go down. I command you this day to love your God, to walk in the way and keep his commandments, his statutes, and his ordinances, that may live and multiply, and God your God may bless you in the land to which you go to possess it. What he doesn't say, he's saying, I command you, but here, and they didn't bring that verse, it says, but I want you to choose. So here, go back to the sort of Rabbi Moshe Isla said the drinking followed the rule. Don't say your actions are forced upon you. Remember, we said that drinking followed the rule. Is in the times of Achashverosh, and that story was that the rule was no rules. Do what you want. So don't say your actions are forced upon you. It isn't true. The drinking mentioned was gracious with no coercion at all. Choice lies in your hand to do good or bad. For so the King of Kings may be exalted, established it this way upon all the officers at his house, meaning all the world's administrators. People have free choice. While if you have October 7th is an example of how God restricts himself to say, I'm going to let people do what what they choose to do, even if it's totally heinous and barbaric. And I'm not going to intervene. The whole world is God's home. And he commanded that everyone may do as they desire. As our sages say, all lies in heaven's hands, but the fear of heaven. The awe of respect for heaven. God does not control that. People get to do what they want, even if it's against God's will. And so you're not coerced at all. All that you do is your own doing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just briefly, so I'm clear. I take the book home,
Okay.
pre-read. You said the day that this would happen, pick a date.
Yeah.
Right? But it says here, days of Purim. So that means there were multiple days, like from year to year?
That's a great question.
And I'm saying that because, you talk to Jews, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Passover, these are the holidays. Purim, we go to work. So what's the big deal with Purim? What does Purim mean? Here it says after the Pur. So you go from Pur to Purim,
Right.
the plural.
Right.
You said pick the day, and here it says days.
Right.
So
That's a very good question. So just in brief, and the Talmud actually dwells on this. There is the Torah, the Megillah tells us that on that day, which was the 14th of Adar, when the anti-Semites of the world, of the empire, were given license to kill the Jews.
Amalek.
They weren't Amalek. I think they had ceased to be.
If you're looking to destroy the Jews,
Yeah.
you're under the umbrella.
Okay, at least conceptually. And now when the king reversed it after Queen Esther's request, he said the rules are you can't withdraw a decree. So I'm going to put another decree. The other decree is that the Jews can go out and kill the anti-Semites. That was the 14th day.
That was what?
The 14th day of Adar, which was the day that it came up in his lots for the day when the anti-Semites were going to be able to kill the Jews. That's one day.
Okay.
The Megillah says that Esther asked the king for an extra day for those in Shushan to be able to do it.
So the Shushan.
Shushan part. It's the second thing. The Talmud tells us that in situations where many people who weren't able to read, or they didn't have synagogues around the fields, and they would only come into the cities Mondays and Thursdays for markets. So they were able to read the Megillah on earlier days. And that's how the tractate of Megillah begins, with the different days you can read Megillah.
Right, so you didn't have the internet,
because
so the word gets out.
Because there are days. No, it wasn't that. It wasn't that. It wasn't that. It's that they weren't able to get in. The rabbis didn't want to trouble them to come in from the fields just for the reading. They had work to do. So they were able, when they came into the city anyway, they could find someone who knows how to read, and they read the Megillah. So depending on when Purim fell out, they were able to read from the small towns. They could read on the 13th, on the 12th, on the 11th. That's
buy tickets.
Even more in talking about the days, because it is a funny thing. It's days of Purim.
All right.
In Jewish law, if a person is setting out on a trip, cruise, a necessary trip, and they have to leave before Purim, and they don't have Megillah, or they can't read, they're allowed to hear the Megillah from the beginning of the month of Adar. From the first of Adar, they're allowed to hear the Megillah, because it's days of Purim.
Thank you.
Okay?
One of the reasons is, because I pre-read it, and then I
Yeah.
did some of the homework, but Jana's father's Yorosite, son Shushan Purim. So that's, so she keeps an eye on the calendar, so
that's it.
just want to be able to clarify. Thank you.
Okay, so now the final one, text 15, this is from the Rebbe. This is also the deeper hint in the verse describing the feast that the king made for all the people present in Shushan, the capital. This refers to not only King Achashverosh in the narrative of Purim. It refers to King of Kings, God, And who's the people in the capital? First, the Jewish people who are his close nation, dwelling in the capital of the King of Kings, in God's capital. God invites them to his feast. What does God invite them to his feast? It's a metaphor for the pleasures of the soul, a metaphor for Torah study and mitzvah observance, which are the true feast and source for a Jew. Crucially, God extends this invitation with complete freedom of choice. There is no coercion, rather to act according to each one's desire. God says, you're invited. I'm giving you the beauty of life, but it's your choice. I don't want to force you into this. This highlights the greatness of Purim, when the Jewish people reaffirmed what they had already accepted, not of coercion, but from their own free will. And what Purim represents for us in the scope of our year and our history, it's this shining light of people choosing to feel connected to God and seeing God's hand in life when they didn't have to. Standing at a sea that just split, that's God. Looking at the events of Purim or looking at the events of today or tomorrow, you don't have to see God. You could see, hopefully it's good stuff happens, but good stuff happens. So we always see God's hand. Key points. Number one, Achashverosh's feast featured a unique no coercion policy that suspended typical social norms and allowed guests complete freedom of choice. Number two, when Rashi leaves an obvious question unaddressed, it means either the answer is self-evident or he has already in an earlier comment laid the groundwork for understanding it. Number three, when the Megillah uses the term the king without specifying Achashverosh, it can be read as referring to God. Number four, while the Jews accepted the Torah at Mount Sinai under the overwhelming influence of divine revelation during Purim, they chose Judaism freely without compulsion. Leon, I see what you're raising your hand. I'm just going to finish these and then we'll do them. The inner meaning of Achashverosh is creating a space of true freedom at this feast is that it reflects God's granting the Jewish people genuine free choice during the Purim story. Number six, the Jewish people's commitment to Judaism during Purim arrived at without miracles or divine revelation was ultimately more special to God than their accepting it at Mount Sinai. And number seven, God deeply values our individual free choice. He wants us to embrace the Torah and mitzvahs, but do so out of authentic choice and desire rather than compulsion. Okay. Yes, Leon. 1 second. I got to put up the. Is it going up?
Yeah, it's going up.
Yeah, go ahead. Try it again. Leon?
Lower left-hand corner where it says audio,
Yeah.
where's the volume?
No, it's up there.
Let me see here. I don't know if it makes a difference here.
Going to the chat.
Yeah, go to the chat maybe. Chat.
I'm
right
gonna
button.
just shoot the TV. I just want to check, make sure the audio settings here. It's all on. And
Okay, volume, output level. That's all the way up.
Go to
on
chat,
his-
see maybe if it
my
pops.
chat.
Maybe it's on his end.
Okay, so similarly to what the advice told them, can there be invasion of the God's no choice? Coercion also has limitations. That's a really good question. I would say that even there, yes, there must be some limitations to it. What they are is a good question. But yeah, I would say that in this world, even unlimited has its limitations, except for God.
So would God drop Mount Sinai on the Jews if they wouldn't accept Torah?
Would he what?
Would he drop the Mount Sinai?
I don't know if he dropped Mount Sinai in the Jews. I don't think we'd be sitting here though. I think it would have confounded the whole purpose of creation.
It could have been Zarathustra.
And I don't think there'd be anybody. We'd be all part of the divine oneness. There wouldn't be a Kentucky and there wouldn't be a.
But
Bethlehem.
he was threatening the Jews, not the rest of the world.
The only reason he did it is because there was the assumption that ultimately there'd be a Torah, and that's without the Jews owning Torah. There's no Kentucky bourbon is not the reason for creating the world.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's
In Kentucky.
yeah. So wish you all a happy Purim. Please come by. Another question.
now we're into overtime, sorry. When I mentioned the word Amalek,
Yeah.
I was listening to an interview
Yeah.
as to why there's a special Haftorah for this week's
Yeah.
Shabbos before. And the word Amalek came up, and it was with reference to the continuing problem with anti-Semitism. Right? Every few hundred years, we've got this problem. The last one being our
I don't think we've had a few
Much
hundred
more.
years.
Much
that?
more.
I don't remember a few hundred years of respite.
Yeah, okay, so the question was, I thought Amalek was a person,
It was.
and, well, no, my understanding was that it's anybody who's an Amalek, it's a term used for people who are, hey, let's go kill the Jews. So it's.
No, that's not, that is not.
So anybody who does that, it's an Amalekite.
I mean, people can say whatever they want. That's not, I don't think there's any source in Torah.
So there's not one person?
Amalek was a people descended from a person. That people has melted into the world. We don't know who Amalekites are. We knew from the lineage of Haman that he was from Amalek. But I mentioned this yesterday in Shul. It's like someone saying to come in today and say, by the way, I traced my ancestry, I'm Phoenician. There are no Phoenicians anymore, but you have Phoenician roots. He had Amalekite roots.
I should have come yesterday.
That's what I'm trying to get you to. All right. Happy Purim, everyone.